Good afternoon and welcome back to the GreenFleet Decarbonisation Hub here at the centre of the CV show in 2026. Today we've been focusing on the challenges facing fleets, particularly in the heavy duty sector, but across the commercial vehicle space. And I'm delighted that in this spotlight session we're able to really window in on one of the leading fleets for vans, in particular for electrification of vans, with Mitie, supported by our prime sponsor Lex Autolease, of course. But I'm joined here by Mike Anderson from Lex and Chris Cubberley from Mitie. So Chris, Mitie as a fleet, what's the scale of your fleet and how far have you managed to go with electrification?
Yeah, so we've currently got just over 10,500 vehicles. We've got probably 5,700 of them are commercials. And we are around about 65% electric. Was a lot higher. But recent acquisition has actually put that percentage down, and now we're going through the process of obviously electrifying those vehicles as well.
Right, I mean that's a huge proportion of the fleet that you've electrified. I guess the first question is, what's been the primary driver behind that for Mitie as a fleet?
Yeah, in 2020, Mitie had a Plan Zero strategy, and a massive part of that is obviously the fleet. So 90% of all emissions are caused from the fleet. So we've obviously looked at that, and we've made the decision as a business from the top down to really tackle it and start the electrification project.
Okay. And Mike, from an Autolease perspective, you've been working with Mitie for a number of years, and presumably that sort of ambition, reflects into how you approach them as a customer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, testament to Mitie, they are without a doubt, certainly in my experience in the fleet industry, absolutely leading when it comes to decarbonising their fleet, and what they've been able to achieve over the last few years in terms of the migration from traditional fuel and ICE over to electric vehicles has been, astounding. We work closely with Mitie, and I think one of the things that we've really focused in with them is making sure that the experience that the drivers have with moving over to electric is the best it can possibly be. So, obviously this program has been quite a few years in the making, hasn't it, Chris? And the support that we can give in terms of making sure that they've got the right vehicles and the vehicles do the job that they need to do, but then also that when a driver takes that electric vehicle for the first time, that experience that they have of moving over from an ICE into an EV is the best it can possibly be. So yeah, absolutely, it shapes how we support Mitie.
Absolutely. And did you find there was, when you started on this journey, was there pushback, you thought, from your drivers, or were they sort of pulling you as well?
A little bit of both, really. Yes, there was pushback, but as Mike said, we work very closely with Lex and our fleet team in giving the training, giving the right information to the drivers, the handover, making it as seamless as possible. What we wanted to do was make it easy for the driver. So charging, for example, we go out and use the biggest network possible for charging. We would make sure that the driver doesn't have to worry about how to reclaim costs or anything like that. We make it as easy as possible. So, yeah, it's basically that was our route. That was our route that we took. We looked to make everything as easy for the driver as we could.
So making that transition seamless is one of the key, if you like, enablers to making a transition of this scale within a fleet. Is that common to other customers, you find, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, and we have a lot of discussion around this. And I mentioned, and on one of the earlier sessions you had this morning, we're talking about the vehicle actually not necessarily being the challenge anymore, and actually where the challenge does come with a lot of the journey to electrification for a lot of our fleet customers in the LCV space is around that whole driver experience, but also relating to charging. Yeah, so how do they charge? Where do they charge? Who's paying for the charge? What you don't want is drivers dropping into fuel poverty or that sort of stuff, So the solutions that are available, and Mitie have been really leading in this in terms of having sort of a multi-strand solution to their driver population in terms of how they both get energy on the go, how those vehicles are charged during their working day, and the access that those drivers have got. Probably as diverse as any fleet that's out there in the marketplace in terms of how you approach that, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. And we combine that with home charging, public charging, obviously, and gives every opportunity for the driver to charge when they can, rather than being dictated by the vehicle.
Absolutely. So when you started out on this journey, I'm sure as a corporate entity like yourself, you will have had some objectives. I'm interested in, you're so far along that transition now. Has that delivered against those objectives? Have there been any things that haven't met what you wanted? And equally, are there other added benefits that you've seen from this, material shift in your van fleet?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it helps winning new business. It puts us ahead of the opposition. We've also, our Plan Zero strategy was based around this. This is a huge part of it, and that's been a success as well. So that's really been good.
Are there any things that haven't gone in the way that you anticipated, or as well as you'd anticipated?
I think initially it was obviously taking the vehicles with the lower range as we were early adopters, and in being early adopters you were taking vehicles which had a range of 150 miles, realistically 100 miles. So you suddenly 2-3 years down the line, you've got those vehicles which nobody really wants, because there's now a 250 mile vehicle. So it's working out where they can be used in the business, and site vehicles and things like that are perfect for those sort of vehicles.
So there's some flexibility within the fleet that you can shift things around. I mean, obviously, I guess the vehicles ultimately become a Lex problem.
They come back to us, yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting. I think we have seen some real material shifts over the last probably 5 years or so in terms of the quality of the vehicles that the OEMs have been putting out there, both in terms of payload and range, because that's kind of the conundrum that we're dealing with, isn't it? And I think we'll continue to see incremental improvements in that as we go along. It does represent a challenge for us as a leasing company, because potentially some of those very early electric vehicles where they were perhaps range constrained, and they were tended to be the smaller type vehicles, weren't they, Chris? Is there a market for those things? But from our perspective, we're totally committed to supporting not just Mitie as a business, but all our customers get on the journey to electrification. We are as keen as anybody else to really push that agenda out there within the fleet marketplace. So we see that as just a natural consequence of what we do and how we support our customers.
Absolutely. And I mean, that relationship, I think we've spoken about it before, that as a fleet sort of manager, if you like, in an area, you're expected to be an expert in every area. So having a relationship with someone like Lex presumably allows you to focus on what Mitie need from the vehicles, and Lex to help you identify how that's implemented.
Absolutely, yeah. Lex provide that expertise, especially with the commercial vehicles, and the expertise we've got from the engineers, talking to Lex and having those conversations and making life again easy for everyone, and really has helped.
And I think you mentioned at the outset that Mitie is obviously growing, and so growing through acquisition and things like that. And that presumably brings with it some challenges, that you've got all your vehicles sorted out, and suddenly you accumulate a whole load of diesel vans from an acquisition. How do you go about that? Is it suddenly throwing them back over the fence to Lex, or are you taking a sort of structured approach in terms of that?
Yeah, we take the structured approach. So we generally replace on lease cycles. So end of lease, we'll be looking to replace. We will plan that ahead. We will use the data that we've got from the telematics to work out which vehicles can go electric and can't. And there's always vehicles that can't go electric, whether that's because of payload, whether that's because of the mileage they're doing. We make sure that the vehicle is suitable for the job it's going to be doing.
Yeah, so I mean, data-driven decisions. We've heard that so many times through the through the sessions over the last couple of days. But what's your approach? Have you got telematics on the vehicles and looking at a big fleet sort of management?
Yep, absolutely. We've got telematics on all of our commercial vehicles, so we have all of that data. When obviously we take on a new acquisition, we look to pull any telematics data that we've got available at that point as well from those, and that really shapes what vehicle we will be using for those roles.
Yeah.
I think what I would say as well is that that's where a lot of our focus goes when it comes to vehicle choice, is looking at the percentage of vehicles that we've not been able to convert yet and trying to think about what plans do we need to put in place alongside Mitie to get them to that 100%. I mean, they've done amazingly well to get where you are. I think that's absolutely, goes without saying. But there is a number of applications where we just can't go yet. But the support that we can give is just keep abreast of the marketplace, keep abreast of the new technology that's coming along, these incremental improvements, so that we can slowly get Mitie to where they need, where they desperately want to be, which I think has delivered huge benefits for your business in terms of your ESG agenda that you have right across Mitie.
Absolutely, and we're working very closely with the OEMs. We're speaking to them about what's coming out into the market, what's available. Looking at 4x4s, for example, that's one problem area that we have with 4x4 pickup trucks, and having a range that is viable and something that we can use in the business. And at the moment, there isn't a solution for that, but we continue to work with the manufacturers to try and find that.
Yeah, I mean, around us today, there's new entrants into exactly that market. I mean, I've been running a Maxus for a couple of years, but there's new entrants into that market all the time, and it never ceases to amaze me how fast this technology is developing.
Absolutely.
I guess one of the things that again has come out from some of the other conversations, and you see all the headlines about ZEV mandate for vans, and we're only at 9% sales. It sounds to me like, if you like, that regulatory structure is almost irrelevant, because your driver was a Plan Zero headline within the business, and then the commercial opportunities that enables you to approach. So forget about ZEV mandates, jump on from a business. Is that?
Yeah, Mitie made a public commitment. And that public commitment meant that as a business we strive towards that. So it was a top-down decision, which made it obviously much easier to action and put into place. Yes, we get challenges from the business, and we work with the business through those challenges. So if someone generally believes they can't have an electric vehicle, we will literally sit down with them. We will look at why they can't, and we will, with Lex as well, look for a solution. We have an EV first policy, so every single vehicle we will look to put as an EV first. We will then create a business case if we can't have an EV, which will get signed off at a very senior level.
I think that's a great way of thinking about it. Let's find the ones where, do all the ones where EV works, and then work on the ones where EV doesn't yet work. And I think it is definitely a case of yet. And the EVs have been in the past certainly more expensive as a product. Are the economics working out for you in terms of that comparison, or is it that the business advantages are generated there that allow you to accept that cost differential?
Yeah, it depends on where you're charging. If we embrace home charging. We provide staff with home chargers, so we really push people for using home charging, and that outweighs the cost of public charging by combining the two. So we're not seeing that huge expense. It's not hugely more expensive than a diesel vehicle.
Yeah, and is that the sort of advice that you're giving?
Absolutely, yeah. I think you will always need access to the public charge network, yeah. But limiting your exposure to that right across your fleet, I think, is the way that you can offset potentially some of the higher costs that come along with leasing an electric commercial vehicle. It's the total cost of ownership that you need to be looking at, and I think home charging, if you can be getting your energy at 25, 27 pence per kilowatt hour as opposed to what you'd be paying out there in the public network, that's absolutely a route to offsetting some of that increased cost and actually delivering value to your business, no doubt about it.
And we've also seen as well vehicle off-road times reduced with electric vehicles. So, that's another cost benefit, which, as you say, looking at the whole life cost of the vehicle, gives it a good comparison against diesel.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard anecdotally about actually sort of health benefits to drivers and things like that. I mean, with you, it's so far down that line. Is there any data or even anecdotes that those added benefits that are sometimes really difficult to put any data around.
I don't think we've got the data behind the health benefits. However, I mean, if you take a 5-year-old manual diesel van and you're replacing that with a electric, effectively automatic vehicle with pretty much every safety feature on possible, there's huge benefits. It really is.
Yeah, I think I've got one of my fleet engineers who's here today, Paul Taylor, will say very often about the difference in the moving parts. You've got an ICE vehicle with, I'm not going to quote because I don't know the actual number, but thousands of moving parts as opposed to an electric vehicle. The operational life of that electric vehicle is just going to be less painful in terms of maintenance throughout the life of it. There's no doubt about it. I think we do see some of that. Everyone's got the anecdotal story of driving a Tesla that's never had a service in the 4 years you've had it and all that kind of stuff. Light commercial vehicles obviously get worked hard.
Yep.
So, those components are still going to need to be changed, brakes, tyres, all of that kind of stuff. But they're just they're less mechanically fraught with issues, and I think that does come through. I think the other thing that's interesting as well is it's much more difficult to have accidents in modern vehicles with all of the ADAS driver assistance systems that they've got, and a lot of the EV LCVs are heavily loaded with this stuff. What you can't control is other users on the road, right? So accidents still happen. But I think there's a number of benefits that EV adoption can drive through in your business. And as I said, it's really important that we look at that total cost of ownership, not just that least cost in isolation, because that's going to help support any business case.
Yeah, I think it's as much total cost of ownership, but it's the total experience of ownership which is as important. And I guess probably Mitie are at the front of finding out real data on this, because the data is emerging. The life of these vehicles, that everyone worries about whether the batteries will last, and they are, how much the benefits are for the drivers and things. All of that data is starting to emerge now, and I'm not aware of any negatives. None of the sort of myths are actually being found to be true. It's all very positive. I mean, I guess one of the key things for me, I mean, you've obviously been on this journey for quite a long while. So for our audience, new fleet managers looking at this and thinking about how they should start this journey, what would your advice be, Chris, in terms of starting a journey?
I think the advice, the main advice would be, don't give up at the first hurdle, really. You're going to get pushbacks. You're going to obviously get pushbacks. There's generally a way of resolving it, and that may be looking at how you work process-wise, procedure-wise in your business, and you may need to adapt that for the vehicle. We've done that in several cases. We've looked at we have wash systems in the back of some of our vehicles, and we've had to reduce the capacity of those wash systems so they, from a payload point of view, it works. And we've not seen any productivity change at all from doing that. So that's the key thing. It's nice. Go into it with open eyes and really looking to embrace the change.
Absolutely. And Mike, what's your sort of thoughts about how to start this journey if a fleet that's sort of just coming to you now?
Yeah, so I think, look, I would hold Mitie up as kind of leading this, and I think what the Mitie as a case study proves, it can be done, and it can be done to a really high degree. And Mitie in itself is a diverse fleet with lots of different use cases. So I think that's crucial. I think the other thing that that has really benefited Mitie is that top-down decision. So getting executive board level buy-in to say we are doing this and making those public commitments, I think that's really supported the team at Mitie to drive that through, and they really have driven it through. We're a support partner to them, of course, but it's these guys that have done that, really driven that through. I think, we'll come back to it time and time again, I think. One, it's data, the use of data to drive the correct decisions on how quickly you can go, which vehicles can go first, to get you on that journey, I think is crucial. And the other thing I would say as well is just, you need to start the journey now. I would be saying to any of our customers who perhaps are saying, it's a bit difficult and I don't know where to start, you have to start planning now. I don't see necessarily any changes to the ZEV mandate agenda anytime soon. and I would rather have a well-planned transition starting now than a distressed transition starting in 3 years' time, right? Because you're going to have a much smoother journey to get to where you will have to be. So absolutely, I think top-down decisions, you can do it, plan. That's definitely the way.
And you know, given that you're that far down the line, what's next for Mitie? Where do you go from here?
We continue. I mean, as vehicles come through for renewal, we're looking at how technology is advanced, what can we use. We're pulling the data. We're looking to see, you know, how we change as a business, what changes can we make, how that can support our customers.
Excellent. Really, really good. I mean, congratulations on the progress you've made, Chris. Really, really exemplary fleet. Mike, thank you for all your support, and thank you for the conversations.
Thank you.
Really good to speak to you. Thank you.